Good morning. Thank you for joining today. Good day for some people and good afternoon for some of you. Thank you so much for joining. This is my second last presentation, and the presentation is going to be a little short one. It's on Hindsight is 2020, lessons learned, things that I learned through experience. And it's just very limited to SP as well as limited to just one population. So I was very fortunate to work with Native American population, also known as First Americans. And as I was working there, it's on a reservation. It's called Gila River Reservation. It's between two cities, two big cities, Tucson and Phoenix. And so I was very fortunate to work with them and learn from that. And so today we'll be talking about some of the things that I learned on how to work with them, as well as some of it was by making mistakes, and some of it was watching other people make mistakes. And one of the things that I would be stating would be that most Native American people are on a spectrum. So just because my experience is very limited and is only with one of the reservations, please take it with a grain of salt, because there is a lot of variations within Native American population and the tribes. And so with that stated, there are certain things that are common. And some of the things that are common for them is the value system. And the values kind of across board is about one being one as a whole, circle, community, and caring for each other and family, along with historical trauma that they have all received. And so these are the things that you will see that most people have experienced. How they deal with it would be different, or the ceremonies or the way they express would be different. So as you stay, as I started to work with this population, the very first thing I noticed actually when I even went to interview was the way they shake hands. And so you will see that they will only give you part of their hand, just these four fingers, and just lay them like this. And that is their handshake. Anything over would be seen as intrusive. And it's a very, very kind of gentle, kind of slow, kind of limp type of a handshake. So anytime if you have a very firm handshake, it's seen as aggressive, also intrusive. And so that's the start of even just getting to know them. And as I got to know them, that I kind of fit in with them, because coming from India, I kind of looked like them. And so it was easy for me to fit in. Plus some of the values were kind of similar for me, what I'd been raised with. So making eye contact, like not making too much eye contact, looking down or looking around is a very common thing that, some of the clients that I worked with experienced. The other thing is especially if you start working with the elders and in the community, they are very apprehensive of hospitals in general, and there is a lot of times some type of a negative connotation going to a hospital, because most of them associate hospital with death. And so they will only go, if somebody goes to a hospital, they never come back. And so there is this kind of a concept, and hospital setting and our diagnosis kind of go hand in hand. And so they think of disease or disorder as something really bad and wrong. And so when you are explaining to them some of our diagnosis, it's very hard. And so what I found that what worked for me, as I learned with time, was that explaining to them in terms of balance. So like balance in your life, there is something is not in balance. So let's work on what is not in balance or equilibrium or things like that. If presenting in that sense was safer for them. It takes a long time to build trust with that population because they've been hurt and betrayed by a lot of people, different settings, different ways. And so, if they know that you're coming from a well-intentioned place, they can sense that. And so when PATS, the state-specific memory, when we are getting that and we are kind of connecting and really attuned to the client, they get it. They're able to kind of drop deeper in their bodies as we're working through. The other thing was also, speaking of body, was very limited for them. And so I started to use words like, sometimes I would use the word body, but also like spirit. Where do you sense it in your spirit? Or where do you sense it, in that kind of wholeness or things like that? So that language had to be shifted. So I was able to work with them. There was this, they're very good with landmarks, and they will know addresses based on landmarks and images. And so using images for them was very helpful. And getting them a sense of their orientation. So when we do orientation, right, around in our office for other clients, for them, orientation was more of a landmark. So we had to actually walk around and make a right turn and you see this tree, and make a left turn and you see this building. And so mainly physically too, the orientation was very physical act versus just being mentally in a space where they felt safe. They knew the things around them. And so that's where also orienting was helpful in that sense. The other thing that really I struggled with initially and learned a little trick later on was to work with boundaries. So as we work with boundaries with most people, they are able to do it. Here, it is an indication, actually, we are challenging their values, because boundaries suggest they're away from this whole concept of togetherness. And anybody having sense of boundary means they're out of the community. So it's almost like you're being actually segregated from the community. So how to even present that concept without it feeling like violation, betrayal, abandonment was interesting. And so we came up with like a sense of internal boundary versus their physical sense of boundary. And so physically they could always stay connected in the world, and inside, they could have that sense of boundary of who they were. Also, with one of the clients, I had to use that, till the forearm was open to everybody, but the rest of the body was just for her. And so that sense of boundary for safety. And so it was helpful for her to see, okay, so it wasn't really compromising her value system or what she believed in from childhood. And as we work through boundaries, using a different word would be important. So like screening, or let's do a screening versus boundaries, things like that. So we utilize some of the other things, which is helpful. I was also very fortunate because when I started to work there, the company had given us a week-long training to understand the population, what is the best way to work with the population, also so that we are not offending them, we are not offensive, we are not in unintentionally hurting people's feelings, because they will remember you. They have really good memories and they talk to each other since it's a community. So if you hurt one person, nobody wants to come to you. And so you have to earn back that trust. And so it was very important to kind of really work in that kind of a population to learn about how to really hold your own sense of self and hold yourself accountable, And if you didn't know, they were very willing to help and teach you actually. I was also blessed with, in my team, had a traditional counselor, so who used a lot of stories, and she told me most of the stories, and she would help me to understand the symbolism of stuff or what it means, because you cannot ask when did this person die or what is the name of your father that died, because they just say they went one with the higher spirit, and you just have to be okay with not knowing when they passed away until something comes up in the in the conversation. Also, I noticed with SP was too fast for them. And so taking long pauses and being okay with silences, sitting with them a little bit. We would do some tracking and then talk most of the session later, and let them sit in their bodies for a little bit, and then kind of do more, a little bit more talk therapy so that they could build trust with you, because they needed to know everything about you so that they would know that if they could trust you or not. And so it was very different working with them, but it was a learning thing too. I made a mistake. I apologized. They kept on. They were a little upset. One of them was upset, but held on and then kind of forgave me. So that those are the things, learning from your client, but they will come back. The other place where it was also difficult was also the 5 movements. So when you do reach, you can't, just touch. There were only 2 female clients, I remember, who allowed me to hold their hand. But men, forget it. There's no touching, not even coming close. So you have to sit really far. And the 5 movements that if I did with them usually had something of an object between us. So I would use that as a way to extend my being present there. I would ask them to bring a sacred object from home. So sometimes it was a pottery, sometimes a basket, sometimes a branch if they didn't have anything, a branch of a tree that they really liked, or that had a meaning, healing property on that. So it was great. So they would hold one side, I would hold, and then I was with them in spirit. And so kind of holding that space for them was very helpful for them as well. And something I learned about the culture was that this was years ago, that they had this concept of like gender identity, which was very interesting. What they would do is, like, if a adolescent was struggling with with gender they were, like, let's say they were male but kind of identified more with the female gender, there was this tent where they would go inside the tent for 3 days. They had food and stuff, and inside the tent they also had female clothing, dolls, female stuff, makeup, whatever, and as well as like male clothing and bow and arrow and things like that. And they would have that, and for 3 days they would be in there fasting and meditating on which gender they identified with. And the whole community would sing songs outside and pray and do ceremonies, everything. And on the 3rd day, when the person decided that they wanted to be identified as a girl or as a boy, they would come out wearing that particular clothing. And then the community would just accept them with that gender. So it didn't matter what gender they were born with. This was just for the people that were, struggled with gender identity. And so I just thought that was such a respectful way of working through some of the issues that now, we kind of are studying, or now we are kind of addressing it. They already had a system. So they have a lot of knowledge, a lot of wisdom, using stories from the past, helped while they were deepening in there. And so that was my experience, learned a lot. And I was very fortunate to have worked with them. So I guess that's about it, unless some of you have any questions. And Next week, I'll be talking about substance abuse and how SP kind of what ways, what kind of things we can do with people that struggle with either substance abuse or behavior addictions. Well, thank you again for joining. I appreciate it. Bye bye.